There were only ever 3 serious Fords dubbed GT, and today, we've got all 3 of them.
This is the Ford GT. It's Ford's last proper go at a supercar, and it's rather lovely, all told. But to understand it and GT and where the GT lineage comes from, you need to look back to the early 60s to one of the biggest U's in automotive history. The story goes that Enzo Ferrari wanted to sell his company and that Ford was interested in buying. As such, Ford spent a lot of money auditing the company to see whether it would be a worthwhile purchase. Now, it should have gone like this. Ford would run the road car division that would be called Ford Ferrari, whereas Enzo himself would manage the motorsport team, Ferrari Ford. But when it came time to sign the contract, Enzo learned that Ford wouldn't want him to enter the Indy 500 as it already had cars in the field and didn't want competition from within its own ranks. Angered, Enzo tore up the contract. Upon hearing the news, Henry Ford II said, reportedly, "All right, we're going to beat his ass. We're going to race him." And the GT project was born.
Many partners were sought for the project, with Eric Broadley, the owner and chief designer of race legends Lola, getting the gig.
Ford got smart with its hires. As well as the Lola involvement, it hired a former Aston Martin team boss and sent the only guy in the company with any knowledge of mid-engine cars, Roy Lunn, who'd helped develop the mid-engine Mustang prototype, to the UK. And they were all going to work at Ford's new Advanced Vehicles department. The first ever Ford GT, GT101, was unveiled on the 1st of April 1964. Now, the 40 in its eventual name comes from how tall the car is from the ground. It's only 40 inches. Initially, the story goes, it was a nickname, but it soon made the mainstream. It made its race debut in May that year at the Nürburgring 1000 kilometers, and it wasn't the race sensation you'd expect it to be.
The cars showed promise, but were ultimately scuppered by reliability issues. The GT project was handed over to the legendary Carroll Shelby, the man who put V8s in AC Cobras and tuned Mustangs to the brink of madness later in the season.
1965 saw a Shelby prep car win the Daytona 2000, but the rest of the season was pretty poor. 1966, though, was the GT40's year to shine. 66 would see its first Le Mans win, a race it would go on to win 4 years on the trot, largely unmodified. In 1969, it was even beating the likes of the Porsche 908, but by 1970, Racetech had moved on and the once great GT40 was obsolete. The GT40 was, and still is, absolutely stunning to look at. Its curves, its lines, its bulges, its vents, it just makes it unbelievably gorgeous to be in its presence. Its surprisingly small stature twinned with its incredible engineering and giant V8s, anything from a 4.2 in its original incarnation to a 7-litre in the Shelby cars, it captured people's hearts. Only 107 of them were made, and each of them weighed about 908 kilos, so it was pretty featherweight. There were various versions of the GT40 made for different series and eras and that kind of thing, but there's one that's really interesting. It's the Mark III, and it was only made for road use. Only 7 were ever completed, and that's the one we've got here. one of these in either hand drive, and the rear had been embiggened for more luggage space. But when people were looking to buy a road-going GT40, they tended to go with a modified Mark 1 rather than more sanitized Mark 3. You see, this had softer springs, and its 4.7 litre V8 was detuned to 335 brake horsepower. This is just incredible. You don't so much drive it as sort of lie down in it. The throttle response is absolutely astounding, and as you can probably hear, the noise is amazing. The pedal box is minuscule, so if you do have big feet, wear tiny shoes, or maybe think about sanding off some of your feet. The throttle treble is exceptionally long. You can tickle it a little bit, but you can really put your foot down, and you do sink it mostly into the nose, which is unusual. The steering, however, is very, 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 very heavy, like unbelievably so, which makes manoeuvring slowly a little bit of a chore. But to be honest, don't really care about that, because you're driving a GT40, you're driving a piece of racing history, and the rarity of this car does make me a touch nervous. The gearbox is nice and easy. It's a very, very tiny lever, but it's very intuitive. It's a dogleg because it's designed for racing and whatnot. It's still incredibly easy to drive. The clutch is a touch heavy, but when you consider this car is knocking on 50, an idiot like me can drive it no problem at all. That's kind of a testament to the engineering, if anything. I think the wonderful thing about this car is that when you combine its legendary status with just how easy it is to drive, even for an idiot like me, with that noise, good God, just... This is one of those otherworldly, once-in-a-lifetime feelings. You know that this thing was designed as a racing car, but this one's been kind of sanitized. I'm not being thrown around the cabin as I would be in a proper racing car. Shows I think what the race prep ones are like. I'm a very, very lucky boy today. This is a legend. I'm driving a slice of history that will probably never be repeated. This is Ford. This noise is Henry Ford II telling Enzo Ferrari exactly where to shove his torn up contract. And I think it's up his arse. I'm genuinely gutted. I'm going to have to turn the car off and get out of it now. It's that special. It feels that good. And I hate it a little bit for that.
The GT name wasn't going to die when the GT40 did. It was set to come back 3 more times, though its next couple of applications weren't quite as legendary as the 40.
The GT70 is largely unknown. It doesn't have any historic wins to its name. It doesn't have an iconic design, and people don't really wax lyrical about it, and that's for 2 reasons. The first, it was really designed for rally and didn't quite make it, and the second, well, it was nearly impossible to put it on the road.
First conceived en route back from the Monte Carlo Rally, where Ford's offerings weren't doing all that well.
Ford's Escort rally cars were getting thrashed on the world's rally stages by rear-engined, rear-wheel drive cars, and Ford needed to act quickly to get itself back on the podium. Thanks to the announcement of Ford's new Advanced Vehicle Operations, or AVO, in Essex, a facility designed for high-performance, low-volume cars, the GT70 would not only be its flagship, but it would also have a home.
Development of the new car had 2 goals. The first was to make a competition-winning car. The second was to make it as cost-effective as possible.
Parts had to be off the shelf to keep costs down. The car's designer, Len Bailey, who'd worked on the GT40, was given access to a local dealership. So if he needed a switch, for example, he didn't have to design one from scratch, he could simply go and get one. Its chassis was simple, its interior rally derived, and its engine was a 2.6 litre V6 out of a Capri.
Ford's top brass were asked for the cash to build 500 cars at AVO. It would be a flagship car, a boost for Ford's performance engineering cred, and a luxury sports car from a brand not often associated with them. But trouble was on the horizon.
The initial plan was to build 500 for road use, which should have been simple enough. But after showing the GT70 to Ford top brass, Ford USA sent over a document detailing 100 changes that would need to be made for it to reach production. Now couple that with a change in rally regulations, trouble in the Middle East, and one more very important thing, and the GT70's card was marked.
The other thing was the car it was supposed to replace, the Escort.
The Ford Escort Mark II and RS 1600 trim was more than capable of thrashing pretty much anything on a rally stage. And while the GT70 showed promise, it wasn't really delivering the results they needed. So in 1973, this very car was packed in a box, and it reappeared in 2002, missing an engine and a gearbox. And the guys at Ford Heritage replaced the 2.6 litre Capri engine with a 2 litre Cosworth 4-pot, and it goes pretty well. I wouldn't be lying if I said that it was easy to drive. First gear is tricky, and starting it without stalling it a few times is nigh on impossible, but once you get it up to speed, it goes really rather nicely. The interior, being rally derived, is really tight, and I'm not the tallest of people. There's quite an alarming smell of fuel, and as you can probably tell, because I'm shouting, it's very noisy. The throttle response is pretty spectacular, so once you are going, it's pretty awesome. The gear change is pretty cool. Very short throw, which makes it almost easy to drive. Almost.
So the GT40 and GT70 each had their own forms of motorsport, but motorsport isn't where the GT story ends. In 1995, the GT90 concept appeared. It was supposed to be the ultimate performance car with 720 brake horsepower, a 235 mph top speed, and a 0 to 60 time of just 3.1 seconds. Sadly, it never made it past the concept stage. Its 4 turbos were never actually connected to its engine. Currently, it won't do anything more than 30 miles an hour.
In 2002, Ford unveiled the GT40 concept at the Detroit Motor Show. Then, in 2003, it showed off the production version of the GT supercar as part of its centenary celebrations. It went down really rather well.
4,500 cars were due to be built. Each one was powered by a 5.4 litre supercharged V8 with 550 brake horsepower and 500 pound-foot of torque. Its top speed was pegged at 205 miles an hour, and 0 to 62 happened in just 3.5 seconds.
And it is absolutely awesome. This thing is unbelievable. It's so easy to drive, incredibly fast. Right now we're doing 90 miles an hour and it took no time at all. The pace this thing throws out is just stunning. All that engine, all that power, all of it just throws you down a runway and it pins you into the back of your seat. God knows how people can drive these within the speed limit. I honestly don't get how they can. Then you have the fact that the steering is really light. light, which makes it very easy to hurl around, but you still know exactly what the front wheels are doing. It's not light in a vague way. Throw in the gearbox, again, nice and easy. The change is so slick, so simple, so easy. It's the kind of car you can give to an absolute novice. I mean, anyone. You can give it to your mum and she'll be able to drive it with no problems at all. Now, it doesn't have traction control, which could cause a few people a few issues, but because of the way it handles, its limit is pretty difficult to find. If you do, it'll give you a little bit of a warning, but when you lose it, I'm told you lose it in a big way. Then the interior is just lovely. It's this sort of future retro style thing. Again, it mirrors the GT40, which its entire design apes. It's got these stunning doors, it's got the look of the GT40 that everyone really wants. It's got that crushing power that you expect from a supercar, especially one that's got GT in the name. It's just cool, but it's cool that anyone can get into. It's been made for normal sized people. I have difficulty getting into a GT40. I can't quite thread my legs under the wheel, but this, you just step in. Everything about this is designed to make it as accessible as possible for everyone. And it does that with absolute aplomb. What cars these GTs are, just wow.
However, the world was on the brink of an economic recession and only 4,038 of the 4,500 production run was completed. The car itself was, and still is, universally loved. It even made the front cover of Sony and Polyphony Digital's Gran Turismo 4.
The GT's development story is pretty cool. It was developed by former GT40 boss and Ford modifier extraordinaire Carroll Shelby, and during said development phase, it was known quite adorably as Petunia. Now, the engineering in here is also absolutely astounding. It uses superformed plastics, it has single-piece door panels, then you have a capless fuel filler system, which, I must add, is now standard on Fords all over the world. Now, you may be asking why this isn't called the GT40, and there's three reasons for that. The first, and probably the most important, is that it's 43 inches off the ground, and GT43 doesn't really roll off the tongue spectacularly well. The second is it doesn't really share anything mechanically with the GT40. Yes, it's borrowed its look to some extent, and it has a mid-engine layout, but that's just how supercars work. Third and finally, there's a company called Saphir GT40 Spares, which makes bits for GT40s, which owns the rights to the GT40 name. Now, rumour has it that Ford licensed the name for the concept version in 2002, but the deal to get it on the production car fell through.
So there you have it, the Ford GT cars from 1963 to today, all running, all working, and all had a purpose. The slap in the face, the rally legend, and the poster car.
What we have here is 5 decades of Ford's development. These aren't just 3 stories, but a reflection of Ford itself. Because when Ford needs to get something done, it doesn't fight through endless bureaucracy, it just gets its head down and does it. You have a racing legend, a rally car that showed promise, and a supercar that not only still makes grown men go all wobbly at the knees, but when it was launched, caused the supercar aristocracy a little bit of trouble. Currently, there aren't any more GT cars on the horizon, but when they do come, and they will, they'll certainly be special.